They told you power was in the voice that shouted the loudest, that it lived in dominance, that it required intimidation, that to be a man you had to carry a blade at your side and a wall around your heart. But they were wrong, because the kind of power they sold you is a counterfeit mask glued to a hollow face, parading through a world that confuses fear with leadership. Real masculine power doesn't roar, it doesn't flinch, it doesn't force, it radiates. It arrives like thunder rolling over a quiet field. It moves like time inevitable, unhurried, and completely unaffected by whether or not you recognize its presence. And it begins the moment your ego ends, not when you suppress it, not when you deny it, but when you transcend it. The ego is not your enemy. It is your initiation. It is the storm you must walk through, the shadow you must see without judgment, the beast you must train not with chains, but with awareness. Because a boy confuses ego with strength. But the man, he knows better. He knows that the louder the mask speaks, the quieter the soul becomes. That the more you chase validation, the further you drift from truth. That the need to impress is the surest sign of insecurity. True masculine power doesn't need applause. It doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need the spotlight. It is forged in silence. It's carved out of solitude, those long nights where you strip yourself bare and stand in front of your reflection, not to admire, but to witness. To witness the man behind the act, to confront the parts of you that you built to survive, but now keep you from becoming. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming demands a death, the death of the ego, the death of performance, the death of the image you've been polishing while your soul was starving. And it's not glamorous. It's brutal, because no one claps for the man who goes dark to meet himself. No one celebrates when you choose silence over posturing, when you walk away from easy wins to preserve your integrity, when you stop chasing the world and start confronting your wounds. But that's where it begins. That's where you begin. Masculine power is not in the flex. It's in the focus. It's not in control over others. It's in control over yourself. It's not in how many obey you. It's in how deeply you obey your own truth. You want to feel powerful? Then kill the part of you that needs to be seen. Kill the part that needs revenge. Kill the part that thinks manhood is measured in conquest instead of character. And in its place, let presence rise. The kind of presence that speaks louder than status. The kind that holds space like gravity. The kind that doesn't chase but attracts. Because the man who has ended his ego is magnetic not because he wants to be, but because he's free. And nothing is more irresistible than freedom. He has no hooks for manipulation, no blind spots for flattery, no need to dominate because he owns himself. And the man who owns himself is more dangerous than any tyrant because he cannot be bought. He cannot be baited. He cannot be broken by what others think of him. He carries something sacred, something sovereign. Not the borrowed confidence of external validation, but the unshakable foundation of internal congruence. His yes means yes. His no means no. Not because he's stubborn, but because he's clear. And that clarity rooted in purpose, born of pain, sharpened by solitude, is what separates men who perform from men who embody. The world has enough performers. What it's starving for is presence. Presence that doesn't waver under pressure. Presence that holds its ground without raising its voice. Presence that doesn't seek to be the center, but becomes the center by being centered. That is masculine power. Not the kind passed down through empty traditions, not the kind built on fear, but the kind forged in the crucible of self-inquiry, where every illusion is stripped, every excuse burned, and all that remains is you. The real you. Not the you built to survive your father's anger. Not the you shaped by rejection or absence or approval addiction. Not the you that chases women, wealth, or status just to distract from the silence inside. But the you that is deeper than pain, older than the wound, wiser than the mask. The self not the ego's counterfeit, but the sovereign force that was always waiting beneath the noise. You cannot touch this power through performance. You can only become it by descending into the places you've denied, the guilt you never spoke, the rage you never faced, the grief you never gave permission to scream through your bones. You have to go there, because the only way out of the ego's prison is through it, through every dark corridor, through every lie you wrapped around your identity, through every moment where you pretended to be a man, when what you really were was afraid. Afraid to be vulnerable, afraid to be still, afraid to lose control. But listen carefully, that's where your throne is buried. Underneath the fear, not in avoidance, in ownership. And when you finally stop running, when you face the ego, not as an enemy, but as a part of you that is no longer needed, you rise. You rise without noise. You rise without needing the world to clap. You rise because the soul doesn't care about applause. It cares about truth. And truth does not flatter you. It forges you. It carves you down to your elemental core and asks, can you be this? Even when it costs you everything you once used to feel powerful. Masculine power is not about holding the world in your grip. It's about holding your center in the storm. The world will test you. People will misunderstand your silence. They'll mislabel your boundaries as coldness. They'll call your clarity arrogance. Let them, because real power doesn't chase perception. It doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't shrink to fit the narrative. It simply stands. And in that standing, everything begins to fall away quietly, painfully, beautifully. You don't need to dominate. You don't need to prove. You don't need to perform. You only need to remember that masculine power begins not in conquest, not in control, not in charisma, but in the sacred moment you choose to no longer serve your ego. Because the ego will scream. It will beg. It will whisper that without it, you are nothing, that your rage is your power, your image is your worth, your ability to control others is what makes you a man. But the ego is a liar, a clever one, a seductive one, but a liar all the same. It promises power, but delivers paranoia. It offers strength, but chains you to insecurity. It sells identity, but strips away your essence. And as long as you serve it, you will never be free. You will build empires and feel empty. You will win battles and feel hollow. You will collect trophies and still wake up haunted. Because power that comes from the ego can never satisfy. It only consumes. The more you feed it, the hungrier it becomes. Until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've built a life that looks powerful from the outside, but inside you're still that scared boy trying to be enough. So the question is not, can you be powerful? The question is, can you be whole? Because wholeness is a real revolution. Wholeness is what the world cannot manipulate. Wholeness is what the false systems of dominance cannot understand. And wholeness begins the moment you end your addiction to ego. The moment you trade image for intimacy with yourself, with truth, with God. The moment you stop performing masculinity and start embodying it. Not the performance of stoicism, but the essence of grounded strength. Not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. Not dominance over others, but dominion over your shadow. This is where masculine power is reborn. In stillness, in solitude, in sacred surrender to something larger than pride. Because the strongest man is not the one who commands the room. It's the one who can command himself when no one is watching. The one who chooses discipline when desire tempts him. The one who chooses purpose when the path grows dark. The one who chooses truth even when the truth costs him everything he used to call success. He may not be loud. He may not be liked. But when he walks into a room, you feel him. Not because he's trying to impress, but because he's done hiding. Because he no longer lives from ego. And that kind of freedom terrifies those who still do. So they will call him dangerous. And he is. Because a man who no longer bows to his ego is a man who can no longer be controlled. Not by fear, not by shame, not by desire. He is led by something older, something deeper, something unshakable. Truth. And when truth becomes your source of power, you become untouchable. Not untouchable in the sense of arrogance, but untouchable in the way a mountain is to the wind, in the way the ocean is to a matchstick flame, in the way a man rooted in truth becomes a force that cannot be moved by flattery, threat, or failure. You walk differently when you no longer need validation. You speak differently when you are not selling an identity. You choose differently when you are not escaping yourself. You no longer act from reaction, you act from revelation. A revelation that your power does not come from being above others, but from standing fully within yourself. That true leadership is not about climbing higher, but digging deeper. Deeper into discipline, deeper into presence, deeper into the silence that remains after the ego dies, because in that silence, something sacred rises. Not noise, not status, not control, but clarity. The kind of clarity that makes decisions without apology, that walks away from what is misaligned, that says no without the need to explain, justify, or soften the truth. You start to recognize what power really is. It's not how many follow you, it's how many you refuse to betray yourself for. It's not how loud you can speak, it's how clearly you can live. It's not in how much you control, but in how much you no longer need to. And that, right there, is the crucible every man must walk through if he wishes to be powerful in a way that doesn't destroy him. The death of the ego is not the end of you. It's the unveiling. It's the parting of the curtain. It's where you stop being a performance and start becoming a presence. That presence is the ultimate masculine gift. It heals without trying. It leads without demanding. It creates without needing recognition. And most of all, it endures. Because while empires built on ego rise and fall with the tides of time, a man who is no longer enslaved to his ego builds something eternal himself. And when you become that man, the world feels it. Not because you announce it, but because your silence becomes louder than their shouting. You walk into chaos and remain unmoved. You walk into temptation and remain unshaken. You walk into judgment and remain unmasked, because nothing can touch you. When you've already let go of everything false. This is the quiet truth they never taught you about power. It begins the moment you stop needing to be powerful. And in that moment, when the ego ends, masculine power finally begins. And what begins in that moment does not end. Because the man who has transcended ego does not need to reinvent himself every season. He doesn't need to chase new masks, new movements, new labels to stay relevant. He has become timeless, rooted not in trends, but in truth. And truth ages well. Truth does not erode. Truth does not decay under pressure, nor evaporate in isolation. It sharpens. It deepens. It becomes denser, more condensed with meaning as life tests it. This is the architecture of the masculine, when it's no longer obsessed with its reflection. When it stops polishing the shell and begins cultivating the substance. When it stops performing power and starts living it. Living it in how he shows up for his purpose, in how he honors his word, in how he commands his emotions, not by suppression, but by channeling them into mastery. He may still feel anger, but he no longer reacts. He may still feel fear, but he no longer runs. He may still feel desire, but he no longer serves it, because his identity is no longer fused with his impulse. And when a man separates his identity from his emotions, his past, his performance, he becomes sovereign. That sovereignty cannot be inherited. It cannot be faked. It cannot be gifted through bloodline, status, or culture. It is forged through suffering, through silence, through the sacred act of shedding everything that is not essential. And once you become essential, you no longer need to defend yourself. You simply exist. And your existence becomes an example, a mirror, a frequency. Other men feel it not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. You don't need to compete, because no one can compete with a man who is only competing with yesterday's version of himself. You don't need to conquer, because you've already conquered the battlefield. That matters the one inside your own chest. And you don't need to control, because what you've cultivated can never be taken. That is masculine power. It doesn't declare itself. It doesn't chase titles or cling to thrones. It simply walks in the world with a presence that says, I know who I am, and I know who I'll never be again. You can feel that kind of man. He doesn't move with hesitation. He doesn't answer with confusion. He doesn't love with fear. He is decisive, direct, devoted to something larger than self. And because of that, his impact doesn't end when he exits the room. It echoes in the men he awakens, in the women who feel safer, in the culture he silently redefines, not with control, not with coercion, but with the one thing that can't be manipulated, embodied truth. Embodied truth does not argue. It does not negotiate. It does not seek permission to exist. It simply is. It lives in your breath. It lives in your choices. It lives in the way you respond when no one's watching, when the stakes are high, when it would be easier to slip back into the ego's arms and call it wisdom. But the man who has tasted real power, soul power, knows too much to go back. He knows that every time he abandons the ego, something sacred opens up. A wider vision, a deeper strength, a more quiet, unshakable confidence. He starts building not for applause, but for eternity. He stops reacting to the noise and begins shaping the frequency of the room. And not through dominance, but through devotion. Devotion to alignment, devotion to clarity, devotion to the man he told his younger self he would one day become. He does not control to feel safe. He creates safety through his presence. He does not speak to be heard. He speaks because his silence has already spoken. He doesn't chase influence. He becomes influenced by living so congruently with what is real that anything false cannot survive in his presence. And that's what makes him dangerous, not his capacity for destruction, but his refusal to lie. He will not lie to gain status. He will not lie to keep peace. He will not lie to avoid judgment, because he is no longer afraid of being misunderstood. That fear belongs to the ego, and he buried that long ago. So now when he walks into the room, it changes. Not because he demands it, because he is the change. Because he is proof living, breathing, silent proof that it is possible to be a man of power without pride, a man of strength without cruelty, a man of depth without performance. He leads not by shouting orders, but by becoming a signal. The signal that says, you can stop pretending now. You can stop posturing. You can stop defending what no longer feels real. You can stop clinging to a Identity you outgrew 5 years ago. Because the moment you stop serving the ego, you step into the only power that lasts. The kind that doesn't depend on what others think. The kind that doesn't disappear when you fail. The kind that doesn't need to be louder because it's already everywhere you stand. Everywhere you stand becomes a sanctuary for what is real. Not because you control the space, but because you anchor it. You no longer enter rooms trying to be seen. You enter as the embodiment of something too deep to describe, too still to disrupt, too rooted to be moved. And that's when people feel it. Not your ego, not your image, but your essence. The part of you that cannot be explained, only experienced. And in a world so desperate for direction, that essence becomes a compass. It awakens what culture tried to sedate. It calls men back to their center. It whispers into the bones of the distracted, the addicted, the ashamed. There's something more than this. You've just forgotten who you are beneath the noise. And you don't have to say it out loud. You don't have to make content about it. You don't need to sell the message, because you are the message. Your discipline preaches it. Your stillness preaches it. Your ability to move through this life without needing to be everything for everyone, yet never abandoning who you are for anyone, that is the sermon. That is a signal. And when others feel it, they don't want to be like you. They want to be like them, but without the fear. They want to lead themselves. They want to strip off what no longer fits. They want to stop chasing, posturing, performing, and begin becoming, not as another mimic of a broken system, but as a sovereign man. And it all starts with one choice: to let the ego die, to walk through the discomfort of being unseen, to embrace the sacred loneliness that comes before true embodiment, to endure the silence that reveals the truth, and then to build from there, brick by brick, breath by breath, until the world no longer defines your power, because your presence does. And when that presence walks, it doesn't need to announce itself, because everyone already knows. Masculine power begins where ego ends. And once it begins, there is no turning back. So now the mirror waits, not for the version of you polished by pride, not for the echo shaped by culture, but for the man who has walked through fire and left the mask behind, not because he had to, because he chose to, chose truth over image, chose depth over dominance, chose silence over performance. The world doesn't need another ego in a suit. It needs the real you, the one that doesn't flinch in solitude, the one that leads without applause, the one that creates without needing credit. So let it end here. Let the ego go gracefully or screaming. Let it fall like dead weight. Let it burn, because what rises in its place is the man you were always meant to become. The one who doesn't perform strength, he embodies it. The one who doesn't seek power, he radiates it. The one who doesn't command attention, he commands respect, quietly, completely, forever. Not through control, but through presence, because now you know, masculine power begins where ego ends. And the world will never forget the man who finally remembered himself.